"Sir, the advanced line's restricted. Active duty and credentialed instructors only. It's posted right there." Walter Pruitt set the rifle case on the counter. Careful, two-handed, he didn't look at the sign. "Day-use ticket," he said. "General line's fine." Derek Solano waited a beat as if expecting something more. An argument, a credential pulled from a wallet, some proof that a man carrying a case that old, wearing a shirt that faded, belonged on a serious range at all. Nothing came. Walter's hands rested flat on the counter, steady as concrete. Outside, heat was already peeling off the firing line deck in slow, colorless waves, and somewhere behind the check-in building, the tree line sat green and motionless in the Carolina morning. "That'll be $11, Solano said. Walter already had it out, exact change, worn bills like he'd counted them before he left the house. He drove the same road every morning. 40 minutes, door to door, through the kind of North Carolina dark that doesn't fully lift until past 7 in summer. Same turn at the Phillips 66, same gravel crunch at the end of the access road, same parking spot at the far end of the lot, backed in, nose out, not because he thought about it, not anymore." The $11 came out of a small fold of bills in his left breast pocket. Always exact change, always worn. He counted it the night before, the same way he'd counted rounds before a patrol, not because he might forget, but because the counting itself was part of it, part of the preparation, part of what it meant to take something seriously. He'd been doing it since the morning he mustered out. March 1992. He'd driven away from the base in a truck he still owned, wearing civvies for the first time in longer than he could calculate. He'd stopped at a range 2 counties over that didn't even exist anymore, paid a day-use fee, and dry-fired at a blank wall for 30 minutes. He didn't know why he did it. He didn't try to explain it. He just knew that the day felt unmoored until he did. That was 32 years ago. The rifle case he carried in from the parking lot was long and dark green and worn at the handle seam with a ring of pale canvas where the color had rubbed away. The M14 pattern inside had been his since the late 80s. He'd refinished the stock twice. The glass was new, newer anyway, 8 years old. He kept it clean the way some men keep promises. But the thing he set on the bench every morning before anything else was not the rifle. It was a snap cap, single, brass-bodied, or what had been brass. The finish was gone, worn through to something duller and softer, the rim smoothed down on one side from the way his thumb rolled across it every time he seated it. He'd bought a replacement once, back in the late 90s, set it beside the old one, looked at both of them for a moment, put the new one in a drawer, and never opened that drawer again. The groove his thumb had worn into the old one was maybe 2 millimeters deep now, maybe less. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking, and nobody ever looked. He'd seat the snap cap, raise the rifle, acquire the blank wall at the far end of the covered line, 12 feet of cracked cinder block, faded white, water-stained at the corners, and press through the trigger. Then work the bolt, then do it again, 30 minutes, every morning. No target, no score, no audience. The other shooters on the line would glance at him sometimes and look away. Just an old man in a green shirt dry-firing at nothing. Some of them smiled. Most of them didn't think about it at all. That was fine. He didn't need them to. There was something in the ritual that he'd never put words to, and he didn't intend to start. You keep a thing in practice, it stays ready. You let it go, something changes. Not in the hands, not exactly, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere in the part of you that knows what you are when everything else is stripped away. He'd watched men lose that thing. Good men. Capable men. They'd mustered out and set the rifle down and never picked it up again, and slowly they'd become someone else. Not worse, necessarily, just different. Like a language you stop speaking. He was still speaking it. That was all. He set the worn snap cap on the bench beside the case, smoothed it once with his thumb out of habit, and walked toward the sign-in window to get his target ticket. $11, exact change. Same as yesterday. Same as 32 years of yesterdays. Sergeant Priya Farrell had been running the armory window for going on 3 years. She'd seen enough walk-ins to sort them fast. Collectors who wanted to talk about their guns, young guys who wanted to shoot fast and go home, retirees who needed the range like some men need a bar, just a place to be. She'd logged Walter Pruitt twice before without really seeing him. Today, she saw him. It started at the door. He stopped at the threshold, not hesitating. That wasn't the right word for it. It was something else. A pause that lasted maybe a half second, just long enough for his eyes to finish a circuit of the room before his body committed to entering. Left corner, right corner, the window, the door to the range. Then he stepped in. Smooth, unhurried, like a man continuing a sentence he'd already started. She almost said something, didn't. He set his rifle case on the courtesy bench, not the counter, not the floor, and unzipped it in a single clean pull. The rifle came out with both hands already positioned, left hand cradling the forestock forward of the receiver, right thumb indexed along the receiver bridge, muzzle tracking toward the floor and then to the berm wall as he shifted his grip to lay it flat. It happened in about 3 seconds. It happened the way breathing happens. He wasn't thinking about it. That was the part that caught her. Range visitors thought about muzzle discipline. They remembered it. They corrected themselves when they forgot. This man didn't correct himself because he hadn't forgotten. The 2-point contact and the muzzle angle were just the shape his hands made whenever they held a firearm, like a groove worn into something by long use. She watched him move to the cleaning bench at the far end of the window counter. He'd brought his own kit. He unrolled it on the bench without looking, his fingers finding each tool by position, the way a man finds his keys in a dark room. The rod, the patches, the small amber bottle of solvent. He pulled spent brass from the front pocket of his rifle case, 5 rounds, maybe 6, and lined them up on the bench lip with 2 fingers, spacing them evenly, and began running the rod through the case mouths, one at a time, slow and correct. She'd seen men clean brass. He was doing something else. There was a quality of attention to it that she didn't have a word for, like each piece of brass was worth getting right, regardless of what it was worth. She found the sign-in sheet. Walter Pruitt printed in block capitals with a blue ballpoint. Civilian. Day use. No rank listed. No affiliation. She looked at the signature. Then at the man. He wasn't looking at her. He was working through his brass, and from where she stood, she could see the front pocket of his rifle case where the snap cap sat. A dry fire dummy round so old the finish had come off entirely. The brass dull and particulate, one end smooth to a shallow shine where a thumb had worked it thousands of times. It sat loose in the pocket like a man carries a stone he's been carrying so long he's stopped noticing the weight. She looked back at the sign-in sheet. No rank, no ID number, just the name and the fee and the $11 slot next to the cash box. Farrell pulled up the armory log on the terminal, slow. Just curious. It was a slow morning and she was allowed to be curious. She typed his name in and waited. The cursor blinked 3 times and then stopped. She leaned forward slightly, read it again. Then she read it a 3rd time. Walter had settled into lane 7 by the time Solano came out from behind the desk. He walked the covered line with his clipboard held flat against his chest, the way a man carries something he wants people to notice. New boots, pressed tan shirt with the range authority patch ironed crisp on the shoulder. He moved like a man who had recently been given a title and was still getting used to the weight of it. Walter wasn't watching him. He was checking his firing point, adjusting the rubber mat with the toe of his boot, setting the case flat, aligning himself to the blank wall at the far end of the bay, the way a compass needle finds north. Automatic. Unconscious. The snap cap was already in his left hand, the groove under his thumb, and he was beginning to run through the ritual pull and reset that he did before every session when the shadow fell across his mat. "Sir," Solano's voice was pleasant, professionally pleasant, which is a different thing. "I need to stop you right there." Walter looked up, not slowly, not with any particular weight, just looked. "That's an M14 pattern rifle." Solano tapped the laminated sheet clipped to the top of his board. "Grand action semi-automatics aren't on the approved equipment list for this firing bay. The list was updated in March. Standard configuration M14s, M1As, not cleared for the covered line." He said it the way someone says a thing they have already said to someone else and not enjoyed saying and are saying again, now with slightly less energy. "It's a liability concern. The range card specifies—" "I know what the range card specifies." Walter said it quiet, not unkind, just placed it there between them like a fact. Solano paused. "Not long. Long enough. Then you understand. I have to ask you to move to the standard use bay. Or if you prefer to reschedule, the standard use bay doesn't have a blank wall. Solano blinked. I'm sorry? I dry fire first. 30 minutes. I need a blank wall. The standard bay has the painted target frames at 15 yards. Walter said it without apology, without frustration. That's why I've been in lane 7. Solano looked down the bay, at the blank wall, at lane 7. He looked at the snap cap in Walter's hand, the ugly, worn-down brass thing that didn't match anything else in this conversation. And something passed briefly across his face that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite curiosity. It was the look of a man who suspects there might be more information available and is choosing, for professional reasons, not to pursue it. I understand that, he said. But the equipment list is the equipment list. If you want, I can schedule you for a range exemption review. He said the phrase like he'd just learned it, which he probably had. But that's a 5 to 7 day process, and you'd need to provide documentation of, I'll move. Solano stopped. He hadn't expected that. Walter crouched and latched the rifle case closed. One motion, 2-point contact as he lifted it, muzzle side down, the automatic geometry of a man who has never in his life put down a weapon carelessly. He picked up the snap cap and tucked it into the breast pocket of his work shirt and straightened up without hurry. The standard bay, you said? Not a question. Yes, sir. Solano's professional pleasantness had gone slightly hollow. He'd won, and he could feel it wasn't quite the shape he'd expected winning to be. Walter picked up his range bag. He nodded once, not at Solano exactly, just at the general space Solano occupied, and started walking. He didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't ask who to speak to about the equipment list or how long the exemption process really took. He just went where he was told, and Solano stood in lane 7 and watched him go, clipboard still in hand, the new boots silent on the cracked rubber mat. Solano didn't leave. That was the thing. He had made his point, watched the old man relocate to lane 12 without a word, and the smart play, the professional play, would have been to let it sit. Walk the line, check his clipboard, look like he had somewhere to be. Instead, he followed. Not close, not right away. He stood back near lane 9 and watched Walter settle in, watched him uncase the rifle with those 2 deliberate points of contact, muzzle angled down and away before the stock even cleared the foam padding. Solano watched all of that and didn't see any of it. What he saw was the rifle itself. It was old, not vintage old, not the kind of old that gets appraised and admired, working old. The wood stock had been refinished at least twice, and then worked past refinishing into something beyond it, a surface that had absorbed too much to be called a finish anymore. The op rod had a scratch along the body that ran clean and deep in the way only extended carry produces, not range use. The iron sights were original, no optic, no rail, nothing added, nothing modernized. It looked like something a grandfather had handed down, and the grandfather had been handed it, and somewhere, back in that chain, somebody had actually used it. Solano decided that was exactly the problem. He came up to lane 12, not aggressive, reasonable. The tone of a man explaining something self-evident to someone who simply hadn't been informed yet. I want to be straight with you, he said. That is a genuinely impressive piece, historically speaking. But we've got a qualification session kicking off on lanes 1 through 6, and I need that corridor clear for range flow. And, he gestured at the rifle, that platform isn't on the approved equipment list for this bay. The M14 variant was cycled off the active use roster 2 administrative cycles ago. Walter was looking downrange. Lane 12 had no active target, just the blank wall at the end of the covered run. He didn't turn his head. I heard you, she said. Solano waited. Nothing followed. He glanced at the qualification lanes. He wished he hadn't. 30 yards away, the qualification drill had stopped. Not paused. Stopped. 6 lance corporals were standing in their lanes with their rifles at port, going nowhere, while a staff sergeant and the range safety officer stood behind the firing line, looking at a range card, and then looking at the berm, and then looking at each other. One of them had a laser rangefinder. That was not a good sign. You don't pull out a rangefinder during a drill you've run before. There was a dispute going on. You could see it in the way they were standing. The RSO with his arms crossed, the staff sergeant pointing at something on the card and then pointing at the bullet trap berm downrange. The 6 lance corporals were just standing there, magazines seated, going nowhere, and the heat coming off the concrete was not improving anyone's thinking. Look, Solano said, louder now because he was talking more to the principal of the thing than to Walter. A firearm like that belongs in a display case somewhere, not taking up active bay space during a live fire. He stopped. Not because Walter answered him. Walter hadn't moved. He stopped because the door of the check-in building swung open and Sergeant Farrell came back out into the heat with a single sheet of paper held flat against her clipboard. She didn't look at the qualification lanes. She didn't look at Solano. She was looking at the range officer's station, and she was walking fast. The printout caught a gust from the door closing behind her, and her hand went down on it immediately, pressing it flat. Whatever was on that page, she wasn't going to let it blow away. Walter kept his eyes on the blank wall. Solano was saying something about a grievance form. Walter heard the words the way you hear rain on a tin roof. Present, steady, not requiring a response. He kept his rifle case on the counter edge with 2 fingers resting on the seam. His eyes stayed on the target line. The heat off the concrete was making the air above the berm shimmer and fold. Front desk has the paperwork. It's a standard Form -11, and if you feel your situation warrants review, that's the appropriate channel for... The door opened. Not the front desk door. The range access door. The steel one on the south wall that only opens from the inside. The one that makes a sound like a vault when the bar drops. The range officer's boots hit the concrete, and he had the printout folded once in his left hand, and his cover was on and squared, and he was moving at a pace that wasn't quite a run and wasn't quite a walk. It was the pace of a man who has learned something he cannot unknow and needs to be somewhere immediately. He stepped onto the covered firing line. He looked at Walter once. Just once. The way you look at something to confirm it's real before you act on it. Then he faced the line. Firing line. Attention on deck. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. That kind of command doesn't travel on volume. It travels on something else entirely, something in the frequency of it that cuts through ambient noise and weather and conversation and lands directly in the spine of every person who has ever stood a post. The Marines at the qualification stations came up out of their stances, heels together, eyes front, every one of them. The RSO, who had been crouched over the disputed range card with a pencil behind his ear, stood straight so fast he nearly knocked his own cover off. The 2 lance corporals loading magazines at the courtesy bench set them down. Flat. No sound. Solano stopped talking. He stopped mid-word. Whatever word it was, it died there, unfinished. His clipboard was still at chest height, still angled the way you hold something you're about to hand to somebody. He looked at the range officer. He looked at the Marines. He looked at Walter. Walter hadn't moved. The range officer walked to within 3 paces of Walter Pruitt and stopped. He held the printout at his side now. He looked at the man in the faded olive green work shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, one hand resting on a rifle case that was older than half the Marines on this deck. Then he brought his hand up. Sharp, crisp, the kind of salute that doesn't happen by accident, the kind that means something specific and is meant to. Master Gunnery Sergeant Pruitt, he said. Welcome back to the line, sir. 3 seconds of complete silence. Then, without a word spoken, the Marines on the deck rendered. Every hand, every head, every set of heels. The qualification stations, the loading bench, the RSO with his pencil still behind his ear. All of it. Rendered without being told, because that's what that printout had said. And Marines don't need to be told twice. Walter looked at the range officer. His face didn't change. Not exactly. Something in the line of it settled, maybe. The way old wood settles when pressure that has been on it a long time is finally, carefully removed. He nodded once. Small. Clean. The gesture of a man who has spent 50 years receiving exactly nothing and has not lost the ability to receive something with grace. Solano's clipboard was still raised. He was still holding it at the exact angle he'd had it when the word had died in his mouth. He hadn't moved. He wasn't sure, maybe, whether moving was permitted. The heat came off the concrete. The tree line sat still beyond the berm. The silence on that deck was the loudest thing Walter Pruitt had heard in 30 years. The range officer didn't unfold the printout. He'd already read it. He was holding it flat against his thigh like a man who didn't want to crumple something he needed to keep. He stepped to the edge of the covered line, not hurried, deliberate, the kind of walk that has a destination it's been thinking about. Attention on deck. 2 words. That's all it takes when they mean it. Every Marine on that firing line came off their mat, chairs scraped. A brass catcher tipped over, and nobody looked at it. The young lance corporal who'd been arguing about the geometry problem straightened so fast his hearing protection swung sideways on his neck. The RSO turned from the berm mid-step. One by one, in the time it takes to exhale, the deck went still and vertical. Solano hadn't moved. He was still holding the clipboard at that same angle, elbow slightly bent, forearm suspended in the air like he'd been interrupted in a language he no longer understood. The range officer looked at Walter. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Walter Pruitt," he said the name the way you read something carved into stone. "Call sign Ironwood, Force Reconnaissance USMC, service dates 1971 through 1992. He paused. Just one beat. The rest is flagged. Walter was looking at the blank wall at the far end of the line, the one he'd been shooting at for 30 years. His hands were at his sides. Present. Walter didn't say it loud. He barely said it at all. The range officer came to attention. His right hand came up clean and sharp and held. Every Marine on that deck followed him. 7 hands, maybe 8, all at once, all the same angle, the same crisp geometry that belongs to no other gesture in the world. The RSO from the berm. The lance corporal with the crooked hearing protection. 2 staff sergeants from the far bay who'd come to the opening of the covered line because they'd heard the command. And that's what you do. Sergeant Farrell, standing just inside the door with the original printout in her hand, rendered it from there, framed in the doorframe, one hand raised. The heat came up off the concrete. The tree line didn't move. Walter looked at all of it for exactly as long as it took him to understand it wasn't stopping. Then he straightened the last degree he had left in him. His chin came level. His shoulders, already square from a habit that had long since fused to his skeleton, found some last increment of square they didn't know they still had. His right hand came up. Old. The motion was old. It had 30 years of rust on it. But the angle was perfect. The fingertips hit the exact position they'd found 1,000 times before. Not approximate. Exact. He held it 4 seconds. Then, he dropped it. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved for just another breath beyond that. And in that breath there was everything. The $11 fee, the 40-minute drive, the blank wall, the groove worn into the snap cap, all the mornings that nobody had been watching and Walter had done it anyway. Solano's arm had come down. The clipboard was at his side now. He wasn't looking at the sign about advanced qualification credentials. He wasn't looking at the approved equipment list. He was looking at Walter Pruitt's right hand, the one that had just dropped from a salute that had been waiting inside him for 30 years. His mouth was closed. The range officer lowered the printout. He looked at Walter the way you look at something you've read about but didn't think was real. "Sergeant Farrell said you've been signing in as a civilian." Walter picked up the snap cap from the bench, turned it once in his fingers. "I am a civilian," he said. The salutes came down, one by one. Clean, controlled, the way Marines do things when they mean them. Walter stood there and let it happen. He didn't look at Solano. He didn't look at the range officer. He looked at the berm, 200 yards out, where the heat still rose in slow, distorted sheets off the concrete lip. Then, the RSO cleared his throat. He was a staff sergeant, young, maybe 28, and he had the particular look of a man who had been right about everything all morning until suddenly he wasn't. He was holding the range card the way you hold something that has stopped making sense, both hands. Card tilted slightly, like changing the angle might change what it said. The qualification drill was still cold. 12 Marines staged behind the firing line with their rifles grounded, waiting. Had been waiting for 40 minutes. The brass hadn't been told why. They didn't need to be. You could feel it in the way they stood. Walter glanced at the card once. Just once. He held out his hand. The RSO gave it over without a word. Not because he was ordered to, because it was the natural thing to do, the way water finds the low point. Walter walked the berm. No hurry. His boots found the slight rise at the left edge of the firing line, and he stopped there, and he looked down the geometry of the lane, the angle of the backstop, the stake positions, the relationship between where the rounds would travel and where the earthen trap was meant to catch them. He looked for maybe 8 seconds. That was all. He turned back. Your backstop offset is reading from the original stake, he said. That stake moved 14 inches east when they regraded the apron last spring. You've been computing the safety corridor off a reference point that doesn't exist anymore. He handed the card back. Corrected firing line position is 18 inches left of your current marker. That puts you inside compliance with MCRP 3-01A, Table 6-3. Left stake, 18 inches. That's it. The RSO looked at the card, then at the berm, then back at the card. He walked left 18 inches and drove his heel into the mat to mark it. He looked again. Something in his face settled. The geometry was right. He could see it now, the way you can't unsee something once someone shows you where to look. Reset the line, he said, loud, flat, carrying. We're going hot. The 12 Marines moved, efficient, no wasted motion. The qualification drill that had been dead for 40 minutes came back to life in under 60 seconds, and the first shots broke down the range like something that had been waiting patiently to happen. Walter handed the range card back to the RSO. Not with ceremony, the same way you hand someone a wrench when you're done with it. He picked up his rifle case, closed the latches, one, then two. The clicks were small and final sounding. He walked back down the covered line, past the young Marines, past the range officer who gave him a single nod, past Solano, who was still standing exactly where he'd been when the command came, clipboard at his side now, something in his expression that wasn't quite any single thing. Walter did not look at any of them, not because he was proud, because none of it was the point. The point was the 12 Marines behind the line getting the qualification they came for. The point was the geometry being right. He reached the far end of the covered line, the blank wall, his spot. He set the rifle case down and unlatched it again, and he reached into his left breast pocket for the snap cap. The qualification drill had resumed. She could hear it from inside, the rhythm of commands, the measured crack of service rifles, the line working again. Farrell stood in the doorway to the check-in building and watched Walter walk back to the far end of the covered line without looking at anyone. He didn't walk like a man who had just received a salute from 15 Marines. He walked like a man with something left to finish. She gave him a few minutes. Then she followed. He was already at the blank wall, rifle case open on the bench beside him, the M14 up in his shoulder, pointed at nothing, the muzzle tracking slow and level across the bare cinder block. His right eye was steady behind the ghost ring sight. His left hand held the forend without gripping it. And she could see, even from 6 paces back, the small worn disc of brass turning under his thumb. The snap cap. She stopped. She didn't want to interrupt it. Something about the way he moved told her this wasn't performance. This wasn't practice in the way she understood practice. This was something older than that, something that lived below habit. He worked the trigger, a clean, controlled pull. The striker fell. Nothing moved but his thumb and the slow arc of the muzzle as he settled back to the first position. She waited until he came to a natural pause. "Sergeant Pruitt," she said, then corrected herself. "Master Guns." He lowered the rifle, didn't turn right away. "Farrell, why do you still come?" she asked. "Every day, 40 minutes each way." She paused. "You could call any base in this state and they'd clear a lane for you before you hit the highway." He was quiet for a moment, set the rifle down on the case with both hands, easy, controlled. "Some things need to stay in practice," he said. "Doesn't matter if anyone's watching." She nodded. That was the answer. She knew it was the answer, but she was looking at the snap cap in his hand, and something about it made her wait. The brass was almost colorless. The finish had been gone for years, maybe decades, and right at the rim where his thumb had rested 10,000 mornings in a row, there was a groove worn into the metal. Shallow, smooth, the kind of mark that doesn't come from months. The kind of mark that comes from a man showing up every single day until the material changes to remember him. 30 years of that groove. "You've been paying the civilian fee," she said. Not a question. She'd seen the log. $11, Walter said. Every morning. Every morning. She did the math without meaning to. Didn't say it out loud. Just let it sit there between them, the way numbers like that need to sit. "You never asked for the military discount," she said. He looked at the snap cap in his palm, turned it once, set it on the case beside the rifle. "No," he said. "Why not?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Out on the line, a command rang sharp and clean. The drill was moving. The geometry was right. 15 rifles were doing what they were supposed to do. "When you ask for the discount," Walter said, "someone has to acknowledge it." He picked up the snap cap again. "I didn't come here for that." Farrell looked at the groove in the brass. She thought about the classification banner, the flagged file, the call sign. All the things inside that jacket she wasn't cleared to read. All the things he'd never said. Not once. Not in 30 years of driving 40 minutes to pay $11 to stand alone in front of a blank wall. She didn't say anything else. Neither did he. He raised the rifle. Found the wall. His thumb settled into the groove, and the morning continued. The 40-minute drive home looks the same as it always does. 2-lane blacktop, pines pressing in close on both sides, the rifle case in the back seat, the snap cap in his shirt pocket warm from his hand. Walter drives with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. He'll be back tomorrow. $11, 30 minutes at the blank wall. The same groove waiting for his thumb. Behind him, in the cinder block building where the solvent smell hangs in the air like it's been there since the 60s, Derek Solano stands alone at the courtesy bench. He's holding the range card Walter set down, not reviewing it the way he reviewed his credentials that morning, not checking it, not assessing it, reading it, slowly, line by line. The corrected stake position, the offset angle, the MCRP citation written in a hand so steady it barely looks human. He doesn't know what class Walter graduated. He doesn't know what rivers Walter crossed, or which names are still classified, or why a man would pay $11 every single morning for 30 years without once asking what he'd earned. He only knows the card is right. He folds it carefully, puts it in his pocket. Outside, the pines stand still in the heat.